welcome. I am just wondering, Alina, when did you know that you had to become a camera person? When did you know, this is my job, I have to do it?
I started my career in journalism as a producer, but when my son was born 18 years ago, I knew I had to switch to camera work. It just looked so exciting, and it was the ability to tell my story my way, and I never looked back into producing. I just continued being a camera person, and I really enjoyed it.
Did anyone try to dissuade you? Did anybody say, that's a terrible idea, don't do that?
Yeah, people ask me, what is a woman doing in camera, a man's job? And my answer was, well, you know, as a woman, we have a different take on the news. We have a different angle, the way we look at things. We pick up on the different details. We're more intuitive, and we can bring more to the camera work. So why not give it to me?
Let me share this with you. This is from Aliyah Chugtai. Aliyah is an Al Jazeera English interactive journalist. She remembers the first journalist who inspired her was Kate Adie, who worked for the BBC, really famous. In fact, soldiers in the UK forces, whenever they saw Kate Adie turning up, they knew that they were in trouble and a crisis was about to happen. Hoda, for you, who inspired you to become a journalist?
Well, actually, I was inspired by the idea that I wanted to travel all over the world, and I wanted a bit of a challenge for myself. There's not really what... Unfortunately, when I started, it was mainly dominated by men. So yeah, there were a few men who inspired me. But I remember when I started to work in the field, I was as a producer, as a field producer. And more than once, I was told, oh, you shouldn't go to that place. That's not really a place for women, especially in the Middle East. And of course, each time I was told that, then I wanted to go more so, and I wanted to prove that actually I could operate in certain areas despite the preconceptions and the sort of stereotypes perceived. And that's how really I started. It was more of a challenge to everyone who was telling me I couldn't do it.
Best piece of advice that you were given when you were thrown onto the air, what was it? Tell our audience.
Well, I was given two advices. One, which was pretty funny, I was told by someone quite famous, oh, remember, you're a woman, people don't listen to what you say, they watch you more. So I was sort of trying to hint that my look mattered more than my words. But on a more serious note, I was told actually to always try to be myself. And that's how I would actually be able to convey a message to the viewer.
Steph, let me just bring you into the conversation. I'm looking at some pictures of the 2004 tsunami, which you covered extensively. When you look at these pictures, talk us through how you got the story, how you told that story.
Yeah, when I look at that picture, then I clearly remember how difficult it was to cover this story, because it was, first of all, very difficult to get there because everything was destroyed. And then there was nothing. There was just nothing left. So basically, I was very lucky. I met a young student who offered me a place. He still had a room, and he still had some electricity. So I camped out there. I was still actually a VJ at the time. I worked for Dutch television, so I had to shoot my own story. And the woman you just saw, that was a woman I still admire a lot. She actually lost she lost 3 children during the tsunami. And I'm still a very good friend of hers. And she has always been my example, because how she pulled out of that awful situation has been very, very admirable. She's actually really one of the strongest women I've ever met in my life. So it was a very, very difficult story to cover. I was there for like weeks in a row. I lost 5 kilos, and my mother became so worried that she actually asked the channel to pull me back, which I totally refused.
Your mum rang up the channel and said, you need to bring my daughter home.
Yes, because her friends, her neighbors were getting so worried that they thought I was going to die. I was losing so much weight. I was looking so awful, more and more tired every day, but I didn't want to give up.
Let me show this picture here, because on the picture we have, because we're having trouble connecting with you, so we're on the phone. Picture we have of you on the phone is looking glamorous. This is you, 2004, where your mum is so worried about you. She's calling the boss to bring you home.
Yes, unsuccessful.
Did you have words with her, Did you have words with her later? I can't think of anything more embarrassing than having my parents call work and tell them off.
I know. I'm so happy my boss also didn't pass that message on to me at the time. But I was very angry at her. I said, what are you doing? You know, this is my mission, my job. But she actually was very proud of me that I did stay put.
Yeah. I want to get personal in this conversation because we're so lucky to have all of you here, and we talk about your work all of the time, but there's stuff that happens behind the scenes that we don't always share. Alina, many years ago, 14 years ago, you were at the Beslan siege. Do you want to remind people about that story? Because it was quite a long time ago. Because I want to show a little clip of what you did there, your camera work there.
Every morning, Annetta goes to the memorial cemetery. Every morning, she seeks forgiveness.
Мама тебя не уберегла.
Mommy didn't protect you. Mommy didn't save you. I left you there. I thought all three of us would die if we stayed. Why don't you come to me in my dreams?
Alina, would you just recap? Yeah, would you just recap, because we played the clip just as you were about to describe what was happening. So set the scene. What was happening right there?
This woman, Aneta Gudiyeva, she was a hostage in Beslan school siege. She was there with two daughters. And the terrorists were negotiating to let the women with small infants out. And she had to make a choice, a terrible choice, which she had to leave one child behind in the siege of terrorists and save the life of herself. Mm-hmm. Small daughter was only 9 months old. And every day she asked herself if she made the right choice. And when I met her, she didn't want to talk at all. Definitely not give the interview to TV cameras, but she wanted to share her pain with somebody. Mm. And I was there to listen to the story, and it was absolutely heartbreaking. At the end, she decided to give us the interview, but meeting Aneta and hearing the story and seeing how she was able to live through this pain really gave me an amazing strength and made me a better person professionally and a better person in my life.
But you know, Femi, I've worked with Alina many assignments. We've gone to many places, and apart the fact that she is really tough, I actually asked her many times, why you're a camera person? Why do you carry all these bags all the time? Why didn't you just remain as a producer? But she has this eye, while all the other cameras and the same story are pointing at something. Alina is going to take these little details that really make the story so good and actually makes your writing, it inspires you to write a story, to write a different story. She really has this very different eye. And I have to also tell you, I've worked with Stephanie. At a certain point, she was producing me, and she was ruthless. I have to say, very ruthless. And that's probably why she's such a good
in a good way, I hope.
So let's hear about this ruthless Stephanie. Stephanie, so you're working in the field together. We're looking at a picture of you working here together. I want to share a couple of thoughts here from our online community who are watching this. Deborah D'Souza says she's based in India, and she writes for Investopedia and has bylines in Vice and Scrolling. And she said, it's really frustrating, the energy spent trying to ensure my personal safety and worrying about doing certain important stories because of fear of retaliation. Are there stories that you can share that fit into that category? Because I'm just going to show some of the pictures that you sent to us. And this is you in Libya back in 2012. And this is you in Mosul again. So you are going to some of the hottest spots in the entire world as far as journalism is concerned. Safety. How do you do that?
I think, yeah, safety, it's always a team effort. I think, you know, working for an organization like Al Jazeera, we're staff, we're privileged that we do work in a team. For example, freelancers have a very, you know, different challenges because often they work alone. So, you know, we assess things on the ground, we plan. I think, you know, there's different dangers. There's sort of the frontline danger of war, but then you also have dangers, for example, when you're working with local staff in a country where certain stories can get them in trouble. You know, if you're a foreigner and you're flying in, you can do a story, you can fly out, or you can be deported, but you need to think about the people that are working with you, that are crucial to the story, that are getting you access, and who may face that retaliation later because they come from the country, they are staying, they have family, they have children. So these are things that are also factored in behind the scenes that you probably don't hear of that much. You know, when the final product gets on air, there's a lot of choices that go into that.
Let me play this to you. This is Liana Agajania, and she is a journalist. And this is what she told us about how she mitigates that idea about staying safe and also being on the front lines. Have a look.
Whenever I know I'm going to find myself in a situation while reporting that would potentially make me feel unsafe, and that goes for being in the US and abroad, a tactic that I like to employ is to bring someone along with me. And often when the magazine isn't able to send a photographer out, or I can't find a fixer, the person that usually comes with me is my partner, and his presence seems to create this invisible border around potentially unsafe situations, anywhere from comments about my personal life to more dangerous issues like harassment.
Bringing your partner with you, is that even practical?
Well, I think what she's saying there is having that company. Like, we have a team, but many journalists, and if they're freelancers and if they're women, are on their own. And I think that sometimes in certain situations, in certain places, can be a real challenge for a girl on her own. So I can understand that, whether it's your partner or, you know, your best friend or just someone you meet who you trust, and say, just come with me for the next couple of days, to give you that sort of company, because it can also be very lonely.
Hoda.
I actually met once during it was really a panic moment on that road in Libya where the rebels were going back and forth. And there was, believe it or not, in the middle of the desert, there was a traffic jam because there was chaos. And in the middle of all that, there was a freelance photographer standing with her carry-on, and who was basically trying to hitchhike a ride back to Benghazi, because her driver and her fixer basically fled because they got scared, and they left her there alone. And I remember being extremely shocked about that image of this photographer with all her cameras hanging around her neck, this blue carry-on, bright blue carry-on, and poor girl, I mean, she was really scared. I mean, we took her in with us, and she spent the night with us at the location where we were. But I kept on looking at her with lots of admiration. Next day, we retreated, and she decided to stay on the front line. And I thought, I mean, us, as Stephanie said, in TV, we have a team, we have a support system somehow. But freelancers, it's extremely difficult, and they completely abandoned to themselves. And I'm not really sure whether they're headquarters or whoever they report to is really aware how difficult it is, especially if you're a woman. I mean, imagine you're all alone with a carry-on, and all around you is basically men. Maybe 2% of the people around you are women.
Steph, what were you going to say? Go ahead.
What I often do in this kind of situation, we join forces basically also with freelancers in the field, because it's very important to have this team effort. I have to say, since I'm working for Al Jazeera, I feel my safety in that sense has increased compared to my work before as a video journalist, when I was traveling alone a lot here in Indonesia, to the point actually that Al Jazeera really insists that we travel together. I had a recent example of a trip to Papua where it's very difficult to get access to, and the situation is very uncertain. And at that point, we weren't sure if the producer could actually come along, because it was a very small plane. And then the desk in Doha insisted that we would travel together because of the dangers that we're facing if we would be alone. And that's absolutely the case when you're traveling, when you're working in the field. You have to have someone who has your back. Very important.
There's some practicalities that you have to think about when you're working, and these are conversations that we absolutely never have on TV. So you're in the field, you're perhaps in Mosul, for instance, Stephanie, and then you have to think of basically your biological functions and needs. No one ever talks
Well, I
about
think
periods in the film.
no, but you know what? You're absolutely right.
Right?
It's hydration, so you just dehydrate because you don't drink.
Yeah.
So that's just something you don't do.
Yeah.
And then yes, absolutely that time of the month. I mean, one thing is if you need to, go for a wee, somehow you can do it. I remember once in Libya, we were driving, we were going to Zintan. It was open roads. There wasn't a bush. There was no protection, and it was two cars, and it was all men, and it was just me. And we radioed to the car in front. I said, guys, I'm sorry, like I have to go. So we stopped. They all opened the doors. They all went to the other side. And you just have to. You think, okay, I'm a lady. Close your eyes, and you just have to go. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it. But certainly when it comes to that time of the month, sometimes you don't have access to bathrooms. For an entire day. These are very difficult things that no one talks about. But as a woman, of course, these are challenges that you have to just sort of get over.
And wet wipes become your new best friend, for instance. Let me share this with you. Imagine that, audience. I'm not going to go into details here. Sometimes you don't get to shower or bath or anything. Tanya Rashid says on Twitter, I am able to navigate different worlds and develop more nuanced stories and connections because she feels she has an insight into, I suppose if we're breaking this down into gender, that she has a way of telling stories in a different way. Alina, I know that resonates with you. Do you want to unpack that a bit more for us?
Well, it's not a secret that women and ethnic minorities have to work much harder, maybe sometimes twice as hard, to get even an opportunity, a chance to put your story, to tell your story to the world. So we have to take that many more risks, that many more challenges in order, to be treated equally. And of course, you can always talk about the pay gap and, other forms of discrimination. But I think women, therefore, are that much more, that much stronger and more talented, and the work comes out better. Yes.
Well, I think also when you arrive, when Alina and I arrive somewhere or something, we're a female team. We're both quite short, and you're surrounded by the driver, the fixer, you're in a man's world, really, especially the places we go to, and they sort of at the beginning look at us and think that these are two girls. Anything can pass. We can have the upper hand. We can lead them, and then they
Little
get
do
surprised.
they know you.
Once I remember there was a problem with someone, and Alina was editing, and then the person was explaining why we couldn't do certain things, and Alina just looked at that person and said, Don't tell me about the pain. Show me the baby. And I thought the guy stood straight, paralyzed. He couldn't believe what he had just heard.
Wow.
I was just laughing. I was just trying to repress it. And actually, after that, well, everything worked.
Alina, there was a piece of advice that you were given when you started as a journalist that was so great that I need you to share it with the rest of the world. Go for it.
I met this lady, and she said, there's one thing you should know. There's no such a thing as a happy journalist in their 40s.
Have you proved that piece of advice wrong?
I haven't yet, but, it's a struggle. It's a daily struggle to still enjoy your job and still get out there with all the excitement you had 20 years ago. And, it keeps us happy. It keeps us on our toes, and it keeps the work really getting better and better.
I think you can't do this job without loving it. You have to love it. It has to be part of you. You want to tell people's stories because, it can be so difficult and it can be so challenging. And I think all of us, and we're really a good sort of team of colleagues as well. There's a lot of love and camaraderie between us. And I think you really have to be committed because of the sacrifices you make also in your life. We're traveling all the time. I remember producing Hoda many years ago, which was actually the first time I came on air on Al Jazeera, because she had to go back. We were in northern Iraq, and she had to go back to London to pick up her wedding dress. So we agreed, well, the team's here, Steph, why don't you go and do a feature? So Hoda goes to London for the weekend. She comes back with the wedding dress, which got into our 4x4, over the equipment. And we were all sort of taking good care of it. So that was a very good example of, how to balance your personal life and work life. And also, probably half of my career as a correspondent, thanks to Hoda getting married.
Let me end with one last clip here, and this takes us back to 2011, and this is Libya. And Hoda did a story about the women of Benghazi. Have a look at this clip.
Is difficult to handle for Layla. Her 21-year-old son is at the front line.
I'm praying for him, for all of them, not for my son only, for all the people they are in the break and Rasalou, everywhere.
And suddenly, some much-awaited news on the fighting. Benjawat has been liberated. An explosion of joy fills the school. Layla calls her son immediately. He is safe.
I feel that joy as I'm watching you, Hoda, and you're telling that story. If you could do any story now, bearing in mind that Al Jazeera is currently watching, what story would you want to do next?
Well, I certainly would like to be able to go into Syria, but without those dangers. I'd like to talk a lot also about the Rohingya, and I think for me, it's very important. I mean, I've done a lot of conflict, a lot of frontline, a lot of that excitement and adrenaline, but I came to the conclusion that it's really giving voices to the people who live these horrors, to the people, just give faces to all of these pictures and voices that might have an influence. I'm not saying it's having an influence, especially today in this polarized world, but I really feel at this point it's much more important to try to sort of make it less sensational as the coverage of a war, and bring it down to really there are human beings, there are living horrors, these are traumatized people, and these are the generation of the future. This is what's going to shape the world in the future. And now with the biggest refugee crisis since World War II, all these people all over the world, mostly unwelcome, all over the world, whether it's Rohingya or Syrians or Iraqis.
90 seconds left, Hoda. You've heard that in your ear before. Let me just quickly go around the other journalists. Sorry to be cheeky there. Step, so you would like to cover next?
I want to go back to Papua. I just been there because there's a hunger, a malnutrition, babies dying of hunger. But also what I noticed there, and that's I think a plus of being a woman. Women told me horrible stories when I was there, and they probably wouldn't have told these same stories to a male colleague. They also told me about domestic violence. They had stories of the men eating all the food, and say they look really bad. They all look very, very skinny and very ill. So I really want to go back there and expose that story to the world. It's a very much untold story in Papua, in the very far east of Indonesia.
All right, so Steph and Stephanie and Alina and Hoda, thank you so much for being on our International Women's Day special and looking at your journalism and also behind the scenes of how you get your stories onto the air. Really appreciate it. Take care, everybody. Happy International Women's Day. And I just have enough time to tell you about next week. We are taking the stream to the annual South by Southwest Conference for Media, Music and Technology in Austin, Texas. So keep an eye out for us there. I will be in Austin, Texas. Malika will be back here in the studio. Hashtag AJ Stream to share your stories and experiences in Austin, Texas, and be part of our conversation as well. Until next time, I'll see you online. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.